Imagine, demand and build a world transformed.
Welcome, everybody, to this session. This session is entitled, How May I Serve You? My name is Ashok Kumar, and the purpose of this session is to sort of make visible more sort of hidden forms of labor, and also to sort of interrogate issues and the links between consumption and production and how this can translate into relationships. And this will be done through a kind of a live chat scenario. Just to begin, we want everyone to feel welcome in these spaces and for everyone's voices to be heard. So please bear this in mind when engaging with chat or comment boxes during the sessions. Please don't use inappropriate, rude, or unkind language, and please don't spam. Participants who violate these principles may be prevented from further posting in the chat or comment box. In this session, we'll be using a live transcription service called Otter. Attendees using Otter will have to follow a link and open the transcript as a separate window. The link will be shared in the chat box by a tech volunteer. If you have any difficulties, please message the tech volunteer on the chat. TWT is free for all, but it's also made possible by contributions of our supporters. If you're able to, please consider supporting us at worldtransform.org to help sustain our work all year round. So on to our session. So the structure is that I'll chat a bit about the kind of architecture of global production and forms of global solidarity that have been effective. Then we'll have José Garcia Oliva, an artist, who will introduce his project of the same name of the session. And he'll introduce Saadia and Malik, two call center workers in Pakistan. And then we'll sort of migrate over to, or we'll stay on this, but we'll people who want to be part of that conversation can go to the link, How May I Serve You, which will be in the chat box. And this is a kind of informal chat, and it's kind of a bit experimental. And so if there are any tech problems in the way, please bear with us. I think it'll be quite cool, or at least interesting, or both, hopefully. And so this is a chance to have a kind of conversation with workers who are involved in this in Pakistan, in a call center in Pakistan. Don't necessarily see it as a Q&A, kind of see it as a conversation, but try not to like monopolize too long. But yeah, they can be a back and forth, and we sort of want to encourage that. I've been tasked with talking about invisible labor. So I started thinking about this, and it kind of got dangerously abstract. And given the context of the live chat, I think it would be best to maybe focus my attention on the question of global solidarity, because I think people often wonder, what can we do? They think about sweatshops, they think about workers in the global south, they think about, and they say, what can we do? And I think it's best to understand this in the context of what's been done successfully. And so we can learn from that, and that can inform our strategies. I think specifically, people think about, firstly, the strategies for global solidarity. What's the kind of difference between ethical consumption, which lots of people have critiques of, obviously, for obvious reasons, and solidarity? And finally, examples of this. So I'll sort of begin with the architecture of globalization. I think it's important to kind of map the composition of these sort of globalized sectors in order to understand where power lies and how to effectively place pressure on the kind of power brokers of the production process. Most workers who produce for global consumption are outsourced. So like, that means that there's a clear separation between global buyers. I mean, lots of people know this, but global buyers, so like popular brands and retailers, and manufacturers. Of course, it depends on the industry. So sectors that are more technologically advanced, so like automobiles or aeronautics, the primary production won't be outsourced. This means that workers in those sectors have greater power or bargaining power because these factories aren't easily replaceable. They're like very technologically advanced, so you can't just easily replace them. That means that increases the disruptive power or disruptive potential of those workers. And because if you have greater disruptive potential, it means that your wages tend to be higher. On the flip side, if you look at sectors such as garments and footwear, or even call centers, they're more labor intensive and not as technologically advanced. I mean, of course, call centers are more technologically advanced than some of these, but those technologies are increasingly for mass production. That means that a lot of those suppliers, so firms, because of low barriers to entry, mean that workers have much less disruptive power because those firms and the places that they work are much more easily replaceable. So their wages tend to be lower over time. So in the case of the call center workers, although this sort of the dichotomy between a kind of buyer or supplier driven supply chain doesn't map on so clearly into service oriented supply chain, so such as call centers, it is still increasingly more labor intensive because of easier access to these technologies that you use. So like a computer and a headset and all the technologies that are available for call centers. And the fact that English is more and more, there are more and more people who can have the required skills to do those jobs, which means that in the two forms of structural power, those things are changing, right? They're becoming less and less structurally powerful. And there's two primary ways to think about structural power. That's the structural power of workers. There's positional power, so where they lie in the supply chain or production process, like what we've just talked about. And then marketplace bargaining power, so how many workers can replace them. And so positional power is a kind of, in a firm, is where firms have a lot of technological investment at a given site. So for example, or where it's located. So if I'm a crane operator, I operate a crane. I'm operating a crane at a port or a dock. I have more bargaining power than if I'm operating a crane in a random sort of warehouse somewhere, right? So it depends where I'm situated in the supply chain. So if my positional power is less, like in sort of call centers or even garments or shoes or whatever, then global solidarity becomes an essential ingredient. And in order to have global solidarity, you have to have the kind of people-to-people connection. And that's kind of what we've seen time and again in struggles for global labor solidarity. So what you see in these sectors is the reason why solidarity is so important is because of the structure of the sectors. You have the outsourced producer generating and capturing, not generating necessarily, but capturing far less value in the supply chain than the primary sort of lead firm, the places typically located in the West. So if that's the case, that means that workers can't make the same amount of demands at the point of production because there's much less value at the point of production. So because labor is the single most important variable in these sectors, as soon as the cost of labor goes up a little bit, the person who's contracting with them just finds someone else because they can be easily replaceable, right? This is where global solidarity is crucial. So demands by workers are far more likely to be crystallized if the pressure is put at the point of production and the point of consumption. So over the past 2 decades, we've seen a number of sort of failed initiatives, not for global solidarity, but in terms of kind of initiatives to try and increase workers' rights in the sector, or not even workers' rights, but a lot of it's window dressing, right? But this includes sort of corporate codes of conduct, which have really not done anything. Sort of every single transnational company has a code of conduct, and they really aren't worth the paper they're written on. Then you have sort of, I think most people kind of recognize that, and the literature is quite clear on this. But then you have auditing regimes. So auditing regimes are where you have sort of independent auditors that are funded by these companies often to respond to violations or whatever by subcontractors, or to at minimum send questionnaires out. And bar maybe one auditor, basically they're all beholden to the companies that contract with them. So they're not really gonna hold them to account because their entire profit model of these companies, these auditing companies, are contingent on them getting business from these major firms, major companies. And most of these initiatives have been on kind of the rights-based framework. So, but the fact is that when it comes to labor issues, the cost of labor the cost of increasing wages or ensuring that you're not exploiting workers at the rate that you are is always greater than any of the bad press or liabilities associated with the exposure of those bad working conditions. And so this brings me back to Marx. Marx famously wrote, when he's writing about the working day in volume 1, that between two rights, force decides. And so that's the evidence. It's not about asserting a right of workers or asserting the rights of capitalists. It's that ultimately it's about the force that we can generate. And so that's what the evidence shows. So the most effective mechanism for workers to gain power is through organizing and taking action at their workplace. But as we point out, in most sectors, including call centers, the competition in the sector and the low barriers to entry mean that contracting firms are easily replaceable. This is where international solidarity becomes central. We often use this phrase, solidarity is a verb. And a very effective means of secondary solidarity, other than, say, blockading a transport link or solidarity strikes across supply chains, which are both extremely rare, is organizing institutional boycotts. That is an effective way. It's not an individual boycott, it's an institutional boycott. So you have a kind of more organized way of doing that. And that's it's not to say that's the only way, but it's an important way of looking at what's an effective tool to be in solidarity with people. People often confuse this with ethical consumption, and it's not. It's a way of placing economic pressure on an opponent. So again, this is not to say this is the only mechanism, but it's that solidarity needs to be a material act, and the threat of a targeted institutional protracted boycott can be a form of dual pressure to force concessions from capital. And people often talk about boycotts in that kind of random and unorganized way, and this is really not effective. I mean, we see this right after the collapse at Rana Plaza, that crushed 1,000, mostly women, working in the garment sector in Bangladesh in 2013. People were saying we need to boycott this or that brand in this very disorganized way. And this is very ineffective, and it's mostly about assuaging people's guilt. An organized boycott that responds to workers' conditions can be very effective. So I'll just give two examples, and then I'll maybe finish it at that. But I think that the first example is if you look at the domestic supply chain. In the U.S., a well-known case is when Filipino-American grape workers struck in Delano area of California in 1965 who were picking grapes. And then immediately the mostly Mexican migrant workers of Cesar Chavez's United Farm Workers voted to walk out in solidarity with them. You saw hundreds of workers traveling across the US and Canada, telling their stories, making connections with various different organizations and church groups and trade unions. And they organized this sort of mass support for a grape boycott that became more institutional. So over the 5-year period of that strike, millions of people refused to purchase grapes. And it became a really, well into the 80s and 90s, still people didn't really want to buy grapes, even though the boycott was over. So there was a long-term effect of that. And workers striking, coupled with secondary pressure, resulted in basically a complete success in which the employers recognized the union, signed their first contract, granted workers better pay and benefits, etc. But the domestic grape industry is very similar to the outsourced structure that you find in call centers, garments, footwear, so on, in the globalized system today. If we look at the system of global production, I would say another example that can be a way of looking at this and thinking about how we look at solidarity is the case of Fruit of the Loom, and it's probably the most successful case of international solidarity in sort of that I can think of in terms of globalization today, at least in these sectors. So Fruit of the Loom is the largest producer of T-shirts in the U.S. market, and is the largest private sector employer in Honduras. It's also one of the 3 largest underwear producers in the world, Fruit of the Loom. So in 2007, workers in Choloma, Honduras, began agitating, walked into the office of the CGT, which is one of the trade union federations there, and said they wanted union recognition. They were fighting for that because they had lots of problems at that union, at that factory. And their factory was called Jersey Honduras. So immediately the union began putting resources into a kind of coordinated strategy. So a few months later, in March, workers at a nearby factory, Jersey's de Choloma, began forming a union. Within a few months of that, workers at Petrolac, a contracting factory also in Honduras, also contracted with Fruit of the Loom, began organizing a union with CGT. And quickly by July of 2007, managers at all three factories began firing trade unionists. At Choloma, it was 72 union members. Petrolac, 6 union members. Jersey de Honduras, another 6 members. So this is when the global campaign began. So shortly after that, there was a kind of increased pressure, and workers were kind of specifically were rehired. But Fruit of the Loom immediately after that announced that they were going to close down Jersey de Choloma. This began a series of intense negotiations. But by January 2009, even Jersey de Honduras was announced that it was going to be closed. So immediately following this, you had union leaders from that factory begin a tour of the U.S., where it was about educating and making clear to everyone what the demands were. And the demands were clear, that they wanted to raise the liabilities and turn kind of universities, retailers, shareholders, and other business partners against Fruit of the Loom. So they wanted to raise so this was a form of secondary pressure to force Fruit of the Loom to reopen the factory and to recognize the union and to sign their first contract. So this is part of what you'd call a kind of air and ground strategy. It meant that you put pressure from above, or you start from pressure from below, and you respond with pressure from above as well, because this is where value is, again, being captured. So within 6 months of the campaign, the cost of Fruit of the Loom was more than $50 million in lost contracts. So 132 universities had boycotted the brand, refused to contract with them for apparel, and major retailers like JCPenney and Sports Authority had announced that they would no longer sell Fruit of the Loom products. So Fruit of the Loom was forced to recognize the union across its Honduran supply chain. It's the only sort of recognized union really in the garment sector globally. And they increased wages by over 20% compared to anywhere in the region. And there's a number of other benefits: free cafeteria, free bus pass, all of that stuff. So the benefits of those workers far exceed anywhere else in the region. So the point of this was to say that when we think about solidarity, when we think about how we respond to workers globally, and how it's not through the benevolence of the state, it's not through the benevolence of capital, codes of conduct. It doesn't happen through the third sector. It happens really when people to people make connections between various activists and groups with workers in the global south. And those actions respond to the subjective agency of workers taking actions at the point of production. So that's my introduction to the question of solidarity and workers in these sectors. I would like to maybe introduce Jose to maybe introduce his project, and then we can talk. How about Jose? Would you like to introduce the project?
Great. Thanks very much, Ashok, for your enlightening talk and very informative. I'm José Garcia Oliva. I'm an artist based in London. Long story short, my practice is looking at the collision of identity and labor, and the project we're going to present now, which is How May I Serve You? It aims to sort of replicate the experience and aesthetic of a live chat, but in a completely different setting. So there's not commodity in between, but a space to have an open conversations with Malik and Saadia. Malik and Saadia, I'm gonna first introduce them. So Saadia Abbasi started her career as a customer service representative from a Pakistan telecom company called Jazz. She currently has 8 years of diversified experience within the call center industry. She was born in Rawalpindi, Pakistan, and holds a master in sociology. And Malik Ayaz has worked in a call center for 16 years. He has worked almost in all domains of call centers, including inbounds, outbounds, quality assurance, front-end and back-end operations. He's an MBA and a computer science graduate. And on a side note, now that we can go to the online platform, the link is howmayserveyou.co.uk. So once you get in, you will see at the bottom right the options to start a chat. You can decide if you want to write your name or not. It's not mandatory and it's not required. And any of the personal information is not going to be recorded. So that's all from my side, and hope you can join. So yeah, the chat is down there.
Yeah, thanks. Shall we? I don't know if the chat is starting now. Is it? Let's chat.
New visitor.
Hello everyone, my name is Malik, as Jose has introduced you guys, and with me is Saadia Wasi. We both are call center workers here in Pakistan, and we have been associated with this industry for last 15 years, and Saadia for last 10 years. And basically what we do is we work for the companies who are uh, serving in Europe and States and in other countries as well. Um, and there are certain challenges that we guys do face, like we do not use our own names. Like I'm Malik Ayaz, but I will introduce myself like Michael or Williams or Jose or any Western name like that, uh, so that the customers in Europe or States feels like that they're talking to someone from their within their own community. Main reason for outsourcing, as Ashok has already told you guys, that it's because these companies find cheap labor here in southern part of Asia, and but there are certain challenges also associated with the lives of the people who are associated with this industry here in Pakistan, as well as in India and in other countries of South Asia. Uh, we'll talk about this, but whatever points those come in your mind, that how we guys work, how we guys keep ourselves motivated to make our customers happy. You can ask everything that is associated with our industry. We'll be very happy to answer it. Please.
Hi, it's me, Saadia. I'm working in this industry for last 10 years. And like our jobs, our problem are also hidden. Lots of people really don't know what problem we have to face in this industry. As Ayaz told you guys, the most important problem is that we have to hide our identity. Then we have to pay low wages. We are not being paid much here in Asian countries. I don't know about Europe, but here we are not being paid with good salaries and all that. The thing which fascinates us for doing this job, being female here in Pakistan, is that we got pick and drop services, and no other attraction is for us in this job. And the other thing is that if we are married and both husband and wife are working, then we can manage our job hours, because here we have different sessions. And wife and husband can manage their timing. One can look after the children when the other is outside the home, and the other can serve when wife is not at the home. Problems are really much bigger here. For women, we do have less maternity leave here. We don't have any extra charges, medical care, good medical care. They do pay us something in form of medical charges or something like that, but that is not sufficient for us. And then the other problem we are facing here is that the advantage is that we are safe. The environment is quite safe for girls. The environment is quite safe, friendly, and secure uh, for the women of the third world countries. Because here in other jobs we have to face a lot of problems. But in call center, we just live like a community on the same floor with the same people. At the time, we have to work with 600 or 700 people at a time. So we live like a family. But the most important is the financial factor because, especially for women, we go outside definitely to support our family. But when, in despite of all that thing, we can't get enough money, then this job is not that much encouraging for us. For me, I will never recommend any other girl to go for call center job. And if anyone asks me that will you recommend, yes, I will never recommend because the growth rate is very low. You work really very hard, but you can't get promoted rapidly. You have to wait for 3 4 years, and the firm yearly increment is very less though. But on the other hand, we do get some bonuses. We also have some team recreation session, training session. Then we go out for outing, for hoteling with our team and TL, the team coordinator, with all their people. But the main issue is that we are not being paid much as as compared to the other industries, as compared in other jobs, especially here in Pakistan. I don't know what is the criteria in other countries, but in Pakistan, we don't have much. We are not being paid enough.
So there are many other issues as well. We would love to talk about everything. We are waiting for you in the on the link that is given in the description of this video. So let's go there and let's talk. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Malik and Saadia. Yes, as Malik said, the link is scrolling under you. It's also in the sidebar, and I would encourage everyone to go and we're gonna do a basically that live chat will be on the screen here, kind of live, and then we'd like to encourage you to make it a conversation, quite chilled, and go click on that now. It's howmayiserveyou.co.uk. Hi, everyone. I'm just here to remind everybody that you can go on to howmayiserveyou.co.uk in the scrolling bar and in the chat box to have a live chat with two call center workers in Pakistan, Saadia and Malik. The rationale behind this really is that we every day are having live chats with customer service from the bank to the grocery store to any number of places. And these forms of labor and people are often obstructed by layers and layers of, of, of kind of of kind of work-related and customer-related and product-related interference. And I think that the point here is to try and to sort of reveal some of that through these kinds of conversations. So please get involved in the conversation. It can be a back and forth. It doesn't have to be a Q&A. So yeah, this is just to remind everyone to just go to the link. If you have any thoughts or questions or comments, just put them in the chat box. Thanks. Thank you so much, Saadia and Malik, for joining us for this live chat. I wanted to give you guys an opportunity to give us some last thoughts as we end the session. Okay, well, I think there's some technical difficulties, but I just wanted to thank Malik and Saadia and everyone who participated. I think it was a really enlightening and lively live chat, especially with people who are here, who've done call center work, who could sort of see the similarities really between the experiences people had here, both within the call center and outside the call center, how you carry the work with you at home and in other places, with the experiences of people, with the experiences Saadia and Malik have in Pakistan. So it tells you there's not the sea of differences that we're told in these kinds of workplaces. And I hope this is kind of the beginning of more discussions with call center workers, and also with Saadia and Malik on their struggles, but also can lay the groundwork for more kind of international solidarity struggles and connections. But I have the last bit that I'm tasked with saying. So to continue this discussion, we've set up a dedicated space on our community forum. You've already set up your account. You can click this link that'll be posted in the chat. And if you've registered for the festival, check your email for your sign-up link to the forum. If you're unable to find a sign-up link, please email info@theworldtransformed.org. Remember that loads of events at TWT20 are filling up very quickly, so be sure to register for any that you'd like to attend as quickly as possible. So make sure you've registered for the festival at theworldtransformed.org/register, and then go to the individual event you'd like to register for on the program. If you've enjoyed this session and you'd like to help us sustain our work throughout this festival and beyond, please consider supporting us at theworldtransformed.org/support/. Thanks again for everyone who joined. Thanks again for everyone who was involved in the chat. And that's the end of this session. Thank you very much.